The disturbing, creepy history of Long Beach's scorecard killer, Randi Kraft. This story about Randi Kraft contains graphic and violent content that may be sensitive or unsuitable for certain viewers. Following the recent news that nearly 50 years after a death was falsely ruled as accidental and the body was unidentified, Michael Ray's simply body was identified and his death was attributed to Randi Kraft's ruthlessness. I felt it was necessary to return to a horrific series of events in and around Long Beach. Simply died when he was 17 in 1974 and is believed to be one of Kraft's earliest victims. So I've decided to revisit this disturbing tale of Long Beach's scorecard killer, Randi Kraft. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get into the video. In March of 1970, a frantic, bloody, and disoriented 13-year-old runaway, Joseph Allen Fancher, stumbled shoeless into a Belmont shore bar. After an ambulance had been called and his stomach was pumped, filled with pills and alcohol, the little boy Fancher took Long Beach police officers Sprague and Booth back to the apartment where he said his shoes were and where he had been drugged by an older man. Discovering not only Fancher's shoes but a harmful amount of benzodrine and Seconal tablets and vials of sedatives and antidepressants prescribed to the person of the name Miss Doris Lane. The police knew the boy was telling the truth. Unfortunately, the police had compulsively made a devastating mistake. They lacked a warrant before they barged into the apartment occupied by Randi Kraft. This drugging and violating a young boy was the first seed of violent behavior that no one knew would span for another 13 years. With a string of murders haunting Long Beach and Seal Beach, this decade-long monstrous period of time was helmed by a man that would also be dubbed the Freeway Killer, but more permanently cemented as the Scorecard Killer following his arrest. Who was Randi Kraft before he was well known as Randi Kraft? Randy Stephen Kraft was not your typical boy. Born in Long Beach in 1945 from parents who had moved from Wyoming, he seemed to truly find his nick when he was moved to Westminster 3 years later. The ultra-conservative nature of Orange County was befitting for Kraft, giving high school classmates describe him as somewhere right of the Attila of Han, which is a ruler, who was a ruler until his death. After attending Claremont College after graduating high school, where he studied economics, he supported the campaign of Barry Goldwater, as well as support of the Vietnam War. Then things shifted. Growing a beard and becoming swooned by the worldwide 68 protests, Kraft just as voraciously supported the efforts of Robert Kennedy in 1969. He came out much to the shock of family and military co-workers alike, where he was dismissed from the Air Force on account of medical problems. Following the development of Sunset Beach in the late 60s, gays in the area centered around 3 bars: Boomhilda, Stables, and Boy's Shed, the latter of which Randi works as a bartender. Following his discharge from the military, these bars acted as place for those either heading from Laguna back home after beaching or those heading from LA to Laguna to escape the city. They were pit stops, and for Randi, they were cogs in newly gay social life. A diet of meth and beer, Randi Kraft dives into excesses. Kraft then drove straight into the excesses of living freely, where roommates said his diet of speed and beer led him to strange behaviors like disappearing for days or locking himself in his room for equally lengthy times. It was around the time that Kraft, sandy blonde hair, a mustache, and what Kraft's profiler Dennis McDowell called a mild urban manner about him. In his book Angel of Darkness, was pursuing the Huntington Beach boardwalk and ran into an overtly confident runaway, Fancher. Asking him for a cigarette and being obliged, Fancher was then lured into only by the prospect of having a place to stay. But Kraft seducing him with the idea that a lady was awaiting at his apartment to take the boy's virginity. Hopping on Kraft's motorcycle, they headed up Pacific Coast Highway to Kraft's enclave in Belmont Shore. Marijuana, wine, and sedatives were handed out like juice and candy until Fancher's body became nothing but a rag doll. Kraft raped the semi-conscious boy before leaving for work. When the boy had a chance to stumble into the shore, he said nothing of the rape, and for 13 years, the file would be nothing more than a kid who voluntarily went home with a stranger. The body of the victims of Randi Kraft began to appear alongside freeways. A little over a year later, on October 5th, 1971, police discovered the body of a 30-year-old gay bartender, Wayne Joseph Duckett, a Long Beach resident who had died somewhere between his leaving Stables, a former Sunset Beach bar he worked at. At the time, his body was dumped along Ortega Highway, Highway 74, in Orange County. All signs pointed to a John Doe. No ID, no clothing, stripped entirely, and yet there was not a single sign of foul play. With no active connection for over a year, the day after Christmas of 1972 turned out to be the start of a string of horrors that would plague 1973. After the body of 20-year-old Marine Edward Daniel Moore was discovered, there would be 3 John Does, one of which was entirely dismembered, with the head being discovered in Long Beach, the torso, right leg, and arm in San Pedro, and the left leg in Sunset Beach. And the murderers of 20-year-old Ron Weeb and 20-year-old Vincent Cruz Mestas, similar characteristics of the murders intertwined with them. There was socks stuffed in the anuses of the victims with bite marks and bruising or complete castration of the genitals. Mestas went through a particularly gruesome ordeal where his body was discovered with both hands missing and covered with plastic bags, and a pencil-sized object shoved into his penis. Terrifying killings, as such, began to haunt the Long Beach area. Oilfield workers in Long Beach found a body while laboring. The body of a 17-year-old boy was found floating in the surface of Sunset Beach. A wooden-picked hammer into his anus. 19-year-old gay student James Dale Reeves was discovered shortly after he disappeared, cruising on Thanksgiving in 1974. The discovery was enormously disturbing. His body was left with legs spread, a 4-foot-long and 3-inch diameter tree limb shoved into his rectum. Randy Kraft's murders continued unrelentingly. Despite an enormous task force being created with members from Long Beach, Seal Beach, Huntington Beach, Santa Ana, Irvine, Los Angeles, and San Bernardino, the murders continued unrelentingly. On May 8th, 1975, 3 young boys hunting for starfish in the Long Beach Marine terrifyingly discovered the severed head of a 19-year-old Keith Davin Crotwell, who was last seen getting into a black and white Mustang while hanging out in Long Beach. The search for the Mustang led to Kraft, who was questioned on May 19th. Citing insufficient evidence and a lack of body, police were unable to charge him after he preferred his weak alibi that he just gave the boy a ride and he was alive and well at an all-night cafe. This incident showed Kraft's physical alignment and behavior, causing him to lose his job after lewd conducts charged at Bibby Park. However, he only needed 8 months to get over this near miss. Another murder occurred. On Halloween of that year, one of the most horrific murders happened 2 months later. The worst of Randy Kraft's murders, in January of 1976, and what prosecutors later called the worst of Kraft's murders, the body of a 22-year-old Mark Hall was discovered in Cleveland National Forest, outside of San Juan Capistrano. His body was an entire map of torture. His legs were slashed repeatedly with a knife. His eyes, face, chest, and genitals were burned with a cigarette lighter. His genitals were castrated and stuffed into his anus. Prior to the castration, an object was shoved with such brutality into his penis that his bladder was punctured. 9 slayings were confirmed that year, with victims ranging from 13 to 22 years old. In 1977, the arrest of Patrick Kennery was admitted to killing some 28 young men, baffled police even further. The tortured body of men continued showing up, provided that there's a search for one man who was indeed a search for at least 2. 1978 brought about 5 more slayings. 1979, over a dozen corpses were discovered. Drunk driving, the odd interaction that got Randy Kraft arrested. On May 14, 1983, at around 1 o'clock in the morning, CHP pulled over an erratically driving car on the 405 near Mission. Kraft stumbled out of the driver's side, a beer bottle spilling, attempted to explain to the police that he had been drinking but was sober. After failing a sobriety test, what was thought to be a routine DUI scenario altered when the officer noticed a slouched man in the passenger seat, barefoot, genitals exposed with red marks surrounding the surface of his neck. Along with the body and 9 different prescription drugs, police discovered a strangely coded list, one which began with stable, ended with what you got. This would be what the investigators claimed was his list of murders. Kraft accorded it to his obsessive-compulsive disorder, claiming it was just a list of friends and lovers. After years of mounting evidence in a trial that was the lengthiest and most expensive in Orange County at the time, Kraft attempted to present himself as a respectable tax-paying veteran and citizen. However, the prosecutor's evidence was too overwhelming, as the jury convicted him, recommended the death penalty on August 11, 1989. On November 29th, Judge Donald McCartan made it official. Kraft was convicted for 16 murders, though investigators think his accountability for 67, making him one of the worst serial killers in history. Despite an over a decade-long appeal process, Kraft's death sentence was held up by the California Supreme Court in 2000, and he is currently at San Quentin Prison, which will eventually become the San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, prompting that eventually transferred Kraft to another prison. To this day, Kraft has never confessed to the murders he was found guilty of committing. And other than an interview with Los Angeles Times, after his arrest in 1983, Kraft has not spoken publicly about his case other than through copious court filings over the years. During his jury trial, Kraft did not testify on his behalf. After the trial court judge refused to grant his request to testify about only one of the murder charges he was facing, he opted out based on the advice of his attorneys not to take the stand defending himself. Kraft, at the age of 71, contacted the Pride Los Angeles last fall about his desire to publicly discuss his case before he dies. This has been bottling up so long, a Grain Kraft, dressed in dark blue pants and a light blue shirt, said during an interview in March over a lunch of microwave Southern fried chicken sandwich and a cheese and bean burrito. "I am getting older, and I am going to die here. And I am frustrated my attorneys aren't saying these things. If I don't say something, it'll never be said." Over the course of 10 months through written correspondence and 3 in-person meetings at San Quentin State Prison, Kraft repeatedly maintained his innocence and alleged he had been the victim of a criminal and judicial system biased against him because of his sexual orientation. "To begin, I did not kill Terry Gambrell," Kraft wrote last November in one of his first letters, referring to the Marine found slumped over in the passenger seat of his car when 2 CHP officers pulled him over on Interstate 5 in Orange County. "For suspects drunk driving late one night 33 years ago and never did, I kill or assault any of the other persons as the authority claims. Notwithstanding that, I have been imprisoned since May 14th, 1983. Some 32 years, nearly half of my life. Nonetheless, several times Kraft stressed that he has no exception of ever stepping foot aside of jail. At his age, he expects he will die an inmate. Even if the federal courts agree with everything I am saying and send it back to the state courts, I will still die in here because it takes so long. That is just the way it is." So Kraft during a May interview, "I think the court's just waiting for me to die. It's the death penalty by old age." Odds are Kraft, one of 741 death row inmates in the Golden State, will die of natural causes rather than be put to death. As the Pride noted in September, California has not executed anyone since 2006. 2 years ago, a federal judge ruled that state's death penalty system was unconstitutional. In 2012, many of his fellow death row inmates were rooting for defeat of the measure, the death row penalty, said Kraft. And since it would not only have dismantled death row, but have sent the prisoners to various prisons around the state, Kraft stated, "Last time it was on the ballot, some people didn't want it to pass because they don't want to be transferred elsewhere. Should this year's Prop 66 pass, Kraft said he wouldn't mind being transferred to a prison closer to Orange County where his sister, who is in her 80s and frequently speaks with him on the phone, lives and could potentially visit him. Yet he expressed some misgivings about leaving San Quentin. It's have been his de facto home now for close to 3 decades. As for being released from prison, Kraft admitted he doesn't see himself resuming his old life, as recalled telling one of his former attorneys who asked what would he do if his conviction was overturned. Kraft replied, "My life is here now. Almost all of the people I care for are here. I don't have any former life to return to. It is obliterated. I don't pine for release. My life is here. I'll die here, and that's okay with me." The fact that Kraft is still alive continues to cause outrage in Orange County. In 2013, the local magazine Orange Coast ran a story titled, "Why Isn't Randy Kraft Dead?" and quoted several of the jurors who convicted him. Kraft expressing disbelief that he has yet to be executed. He loved his freedom, and the longer he's in jail, it's the only justice my family has, Matt Grimble told the publication. This is the story of Randy Kraft. Thank you guys for watching. Be thugging out.